Please do complete it. Your feedback is really helpful to us in planning our future events, so that's really appreciated. So on to today's webinar on managing driver speed in fleets. I'd like to start by saying a big thank you to the sponsors of today's webinar, to Logis. Their sponsorship has enabled us to make this webinar free for attendees, which is fantastic. And just before we get into the main speakers, for those of you who haven't come across Brake before, I'll give you a bit of background on us and why we're running this webinar. So we're a national road safety charity here in New Zealand, and we launched here in 2011. We're also part of the international charity Brake, which was founded in the UK in 1995, and we've got two key objectives: preventing road deaths and injuries through educational initiatives and campaigns, and supporting people that have been affected by crashes through our support services. We run a range of initiatives, including Road Safety Week in New Zealand each May, and on the support side of our work, we provide free support books for children and adults who've been bereaved in a crash, and these can be ordered by contacting Brake. One of our key audiences is at-work drivers, and we reach them through fleet managers, driver trainers, and health and safety personnel. Our Brake professional service for fleet professionals around the world provides best practice guidance, research, and other resources to help you manage your road risk. And the service is open to anyone working in fleet safety wherever they are in the world. It aims to help fleet managers to tackle road risk and share best practice in fleet safety. Benefits of membership include fortnightly bulletins with road safety research and initiatives, password access to the website that you can see here, and through which you can view guidance reports and download a range of resources. And also we have events like the one today. So we provide a range of tools through Brake Professional to help you tackle risk, and these are just a few examples. Our pledge is our 6 golden rules of safe and sustainable driving, and it's our flagship campaign. And we've got a number of resources available with reminders of those messages, such as posters and tyre tread indicators. We regularly produce guidance reports for managers on fleet safety topics, from selling road safety to the board and essential fleet safety guides for SMEs to tackling drink and drug driving. We also produce advice sheets for drivers and have other resources like our interactive online activities. This is our morning after calculator, which demonstrates how long it takes for alcohol to leave your system. We've got posters aimed at all drivers, at-work drivers, and in communities, and you can order resources like bumper stickers as well. Many of those resources are free to members, though some of the printed resources have a cost attached, and I'll talk a little bit more about membership at the end. So moving on to our topic today, speed is a critical factor in all road crashes and casualties. Driving is unpredictable, and if something unexpected happens, the driver's speed is a key factor in the severity of a crash and injuries suffered as a result. So simple physics tells us that the faster a vehicle is going, the harder it hits and the more damage is caused. There's no safe speed to hit someone, so avoiding a crash is key. And small increases result in much greater increases in stopping distances. So just looking at our stopping distances example, if you compare 30 kilometres an hour to 60 or 20 miles per hour to 40, you double your speed, but your stopping distance trebles. And we know at-work drivers are particularly prone to speeding. A survey of UK at-work drivers that Brake conducted found 41% said that they drove at 35 miles per hour or 55 kilometres an hour or above in a 30 mile an hour, approximately 50 kilometres an hour zone at least weekly, compared to 26% of drivers who don't drive on work purposes. So employers with staff who drive for work can play a critical part in reducing and managing speed, and our speakers today are going to focus on various aspects of that. So I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker. It's Ian Johnston, who is adjunct professor at the Monash University Accident Research Centre, and he's the independent chair of the National Road Safety Partnership Programme in Australia. So Ian, I'm going to hand over to you now. I'll just make you the presenter, so I'll just check we can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can, Caroline.
Great, so we can hear you, Ian, loud and clear. That's great. I'm just making you the presenter, so you should have a box that appears on your screen asking you to accept being the presenter.
Show my screen.
Great, and we can see that now. So that's great. You can carry on with your presentation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to talk to you about low-level speeding, which is something that I've had a lot to do with. Just beginning, the direct cause of all physical injury is kinetic energy, and we've known that for hundreds of years, since Newton told us about it. So the amount of energy is half the mass, half the weight of the vehicle times the square of the speed, which is why speed is such an important factor. And everyone knows that the faster you're going, when you hit something, the more hurt you're going to become. But lots of folk dispute that speed has any influence on crash risk. In other words, how fast we're going doesn't impact on whether we're going to have a crash, but only on the amount of injury if we happen to have a crash. So what are the facts? Well, there's a lot of different methods, and I think Caroline mentioned in the introduction, the police reports say that at least a third of serious casualty crashes have speed as a factor. In a sense, we have to set that aside scientifically, because the police are looking for illegal behaviour, and it doesn't automatically follow that if someone's exceeding the limit that caused the crash. So let's look at the scientific methods. The gold standard is the case control method, and there were two studies done in Adelaide by the University of Adelaide, where they took a sample of crashes, casualty crashes that occurred in a 60km/h zone in Adelaide, and a sample that occurred in the rural area. I'm only going to talk about the urban one. They took the sample of casualty crashes, and then using things like skid measurements and computer reconstruction using the damage of the vehicle, they then estimated what the travel speeds were immediately before the collision. And then for each crash that they eliminated anywhere there was alcohol involved or drugs involved or clear running of a red light or anything of that order. So they tried to eliminate all the factors other than speed. They then went to every one of those crash sites on the same day of the week, at the same time of day, and in the same weather conditions as had prevailed during the crash, and took 10 measurements of free speed, and free speed is where a driver is unconstrained by other traffic, so is able to travel at the speed they want. And then they compared the speeds of travel at the crash sites of people who didn't have crashes with those of people who did. And you can see the results there. If people were doing 65 in a 60 zone, the risk was doubled over if you were complying with the speed limit. And at 80 in the 60 zone, it was 30 times higher. So that's exactly logical. We know that the faster you're going to go, if you're really hooning, then the more you're going to get into trouble. But the interesting thing was a doubling of the risk at only 5 kilometres an hour over. Now, that was the gold standard scientific method. And second one is there are lots of speed limit changes in countries around the world, and so you can have a look at what happens to casualty crashes when limits go up or down. The classic was USA interstate highways, where in the oil crisis of the 70s, a alleged temporary speed limit was introduced to conserve petrol. And the unexpected result was a huge reduction in fatalities on interstate highways. So when the fuel crisis was over, they kept the lower speed limit until eventually the states started to object that the federal government had no right to constrain travel on interstate highways, and individual states were able to revert to whatever speeds they wanted, and up went the fatalities again. Similar thing happened in Victoria on the Hume Highway, the main road between Melbourne and Sydney. With the introduction of 50 km/h speed limits, dropping them from 60 in Melbourne, there was a massive reduction in crashes involving pedestrians and cyclists and at intersections. And then Rune Elvik, a famous Norwegian researcher in this field, did what's called a meta-analysis. He found about 100 studies of changes in speed limits. He looked at all of those to see what the effects were and concluded that roughly a 5% decrease in average speeds leads to about a 10% decrease in injury crashes and 20% in fatal crashes. Now the third method is probably the weakest scientifically, but it adds weight to all of the evidence that's been accumulating. In the UK there was a study of different classes of rural roads, different engineering standards, and what they did was go and measure free speeds at each of these different levels of road, and they found that within each, so with the high standard roads, the roads in that group with the highest average travel speeds had the highest crash frequencies. In the lowest standard roads, once again, the lowest standard roads with the highest average travel speeds had the highest crash frequencies. So there is no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that moderation of travel speed is critical to injury prevention. And the science is really clear, but why do we get so uptight about low-level speeding? Well, the first issue is the traditional speed limit setting. We originally set speed limits on what were called the 85th percentile, so it was an attempt to say, well, people seem to know what speeds are safe, so if we look at what the speeds that 85% of people are at or below, then we'll set the limit at that. But even more importantly was the enforcement tolerance. So the police looked at the accuracy of speedometers, which at the time the design rule said plus or minus 10%. They looked at the accuracy of their radar measuring devices and speed cameras, which was roughly plus or minus 3 kilometres an hour, put the two together and said, to avoid anyone challenging us with a speed ticket, we won't enforce less than basically 10% or 10 kilometres an hour. So in a 60 zone, you didn't get ticketed until you were doing 70, in a 100 zone until you were doing 110. So it's hardly surprising that with all of that, the message we actually gave to the public was what's on the sign isn't really the limit. You can do 10k above that without getting into trouble. Secondly, vehicle design. It's really interesting. We have a whole raft of safety design rules, but not one relates to top speed capability or acceleration performance. And then if there's a picture there of a traditional speedometer, which goes around at 260 kilometres an hour, which is more than double what's permissible in almost every country. And the range up to about 100 or 110 really only takes up half the dial. So we're really encouraging people to go past what is reasonable. Then the next issue, and this is an Australian example, the speed limits are not set relative to the level of safety built into a piece of road. If you look at that raft of different classes of road, they all have the same speed limit. So we're really asking people to make their own decisions. And then the key thing is that most of us exceed the speed limit by small amounts on at least one or two occasions every time we drive, and we drive pretty much every day and sometimes several times a day, and nothing much happens. And so our everyday experience is that low-level speeding doesn't get us into trouble. So we're confronted with this kind of perfect storm of conditions which argue against the importance of low-level speeding despite the science. And we really want the police to tackle the HOOM stuff, the high-range speeding offences. But they're relatively rare. Sure, there are HOOMs doing it, but there's not that many of them. It is a higher extreme risk, but because there's not many of them, it is a dramatic safety problem. They're the ones we see on television. They're the ones we read about in the newspaper. But the low-range speeding offences are very common, and they do lead. It's a much lower elevated risk. It's only kind of twice what it is if you're doing the limit, but because everyone's doing it, you do get a very substantial number of crashes out of that. And to try and explain how that works, let's have a look at, in Australia, we have 0.05 as our blood alcohol limit. Now, the similar sort of research to the case control stuff I talked about before, 0.05 is where the risk of a crash doubles over what it would be if you were at a zero blood alcohol. And that's where the government says, well, it's twice the normal risk. And random breath testing, it is all about trying to discourage people at not just at low levels, but from any drinking. And health prevention it really is all about getting people to take precautions, even though it's not them that are going to be saved. And the parallels with our seatbelt wearing, if you've got a small individual risk, a small risk per trip, we have to change the behaviour of the population. And that's exactly what we do with seatbelt wearing. All of us wear our belts, but we know there's a very small risk on any given trip, just as the same as we know there's a small risk if we just exceed the speed limit by small amounts. But we do it because the cost seems small. We wear our motorcycle helmets, we wear our bicycle helmets, but as soon as there is the speeding case, we think there's a personal cost because we think it's going to cost time, it's going to be frustrating, there's this everything happens now kind of pace of life, and there have been years and years of the enforcement tolerances. So speed limits have lost the concept of limit. And so unlike seatbelt wearing and motorcycle helmet wearing, we don't want to comply with low-level speeding. So what can we do about all of this? Well, you know, if we look at road design, we can have special things about local area traffic management and intersection design, but the critical thing is we've got to match the speed limits to the safety of the infrastructure. So if we've got a high pedestrian area, let's keep it down to 30 or 40 kilometres an hour. If it is an intercity road, then by all means let's have 100 or 110, providing we guard the roadsides, we have central medians so you can't have head-on collisions. So we have to learn to set the limits according to the level of safety built into the infrastructure. Again, with the vehicles, we've got to talk about the instrumentation. We've got to talk about the marketing, because there's no doubt the manufacturers are still promoting power and performance as selling features. We hope in the future with things like intelligent speed adaptations that the technology will start to take control. At the moment there are systems that warn people when they're exceeding the limit. There are also systems that slow you down when you're exceeding the limit, but they're not very widespread yet, but we have the ability to do that. In the meantime, we have to stick with enforcement as our primary tool till we get the roads fixed and the vehicles changed. We can have the fixed camera stuff, we can have mobile cameras. It has to be intense. We have to reduce the tolerances, and these are not popular things, but that's what we have to do. So just to wrap up, this stuff isn't rocket science, and I've worked in this field for a long time now, and it really strikes me that the difference between what we know, what we have very clear evidence for, and what actually happens are just so poles apart. We know that the higher the speed, the greater the crash risk, and also, of course, the more severe the crashes. And we have to try and adopt the preventive medicine principles. We've got to change population behaviour. How we set about doing that? Well, I mean, one of the objectives of BRAKE is through the education process. But so we have to go through the social change. And I think initially our most powerful tool is going to be intense enforcement with powerful supporting education. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Ian. That was a really interesting presentation and slides you had there. I'm just going to make myself the presenter again. And so we've got a bit of time now to put some questions to Ian while he's still on the line. So if you have a question for Ian, if you want to send it through using the question pane on your control panel, then it should come through to me and let me know that there are some questions coming in. So feel free to type those through. And whilst that's happening, I've got one to start off with, Ian, which is just, could you explain a little bit more, just in case there are people out there who aren't sure of what it means, what we mean by intelligent speed adaptation and how that works?
They're simply electronic systems which where, just as we use satellite navigation systems now to tell us the best route to wherever we want to go, these systems can be programmed to know what the speed limit is on any particular section of road. And so they are monitoring, they know the speed limit that applies there, they know what speed the vehicle's doing, they can alert the driver by sending off a little signal. If the driver, typically if the driver exceeds the limit for more than 3 seconds in a row, they're saying, hey, slow down. Or in the extreme version, they will actually slow the vehicle down. But as I said, that doesn't happen very much yet, but I think the potential's there for it.
Great, thanks. And so those are the two different options for ISA are the advisory, which advises you that you're going beyond the speed limit, and the mandatory, where it actually limits the vehicle and stops it from going over the speed limit.
That's correct. That's correct.
Great. Thanks very much for that. I've got a question come through, so I'm just going to put this one to you, Ian. Given that slower speed limits increase pollution and that slower speeds also reduce productivity to some extent as they increase travel times for some industries, leading to extra costs, are the current speed limits a happy medium, a balance of the positives and the negatives?
Look, there's a real myth about the productivity implications of lower speeds. There's an Australian trucking company, National Trucking Company, who lowered their maximum speed limit for their fleet of heavy vehicles to 90 kilometres an hour rather than the 100 that normally has the speed limiting devices, and they lost nothing in productivity and gained enormously in reduced fuel usage and reduced maintenance, particularly on axles and the like. So there really is a myth, particularly for some of the long distance stuff, about fuel, about the economy. There was also in Sweden a courier company where the managing director said, right, you guys are going to get a bonus if you use less fuel. And he lost nothing in productivity, and he discovered, because he was self-insuring, he discovered that his insurance costs went down enormously. So when you look at particular, whether it's an urban courier or whether it is a long-distance transport operator, the productivity impacts of speed moderation are really minimal.
Yep, I agree with you on that too. From our guidance and the research that we've looked at as well, Ian, similar to you, that driving at excessive speeds actually increases your fuel consumption and the vehicle wear and tear, where conversely, if you drive at lower speeds in an eco-friendly way, you reduce both your carbon emissions and also you can save up to 30% on your fuel costs. So there's certainly something there. Great, okay. So that's it currently, but if anyone's still got a question for Ian later on, we will put that to him hopefully later in the session. We've got a final Q&A session to wrap up at the end. So thanks very much for that, Ian. We're going to move on now to our next speaker for today, which is Jim McKinley. He's Telodis' General Manager of the Asia Pacific region. So I'm just going to check that we can hear you, Jim. And Ian, just a quick reminder that I still can't mute you. So Ian, we can still possibly hear you in the background. If you can try and be quiet, that's fantastic. Thanks. Sorry about that. But yeah, Jim, we've got you as well. So I'm going to change over and make you the presenter now. So you should get the box up asking you to share your screen. Great, we can see that now. So I'll mute myself and you can carry on. Thanks very much, Jim.
Okay, thanks everyone for attending. I think Ian made some very relevant points there, and I guess the part that I'm going to do here is a continuation of that, because if you can manage it and measure it, or sorry, if you can measure it, you can manage it. And I'm going to go through some tools which we put together which would help in that whole management of safety. Just a slight flavour of who we are. The company was actually started in New Zealand, and we still have nearly 300 people working in our development centre in Christchurch. But I think the most relevant part here was just that some of the companies we're working with globally to reduce the speeding and get into their safety programs overall. Our single largest customer is AT&T with nearly 60,000 vehicles, and as you can imagine, that's huge amount of potential crashes, etc., that can take place in a year. So what I'll do really is go through some of the future technologies we're looking at and the kind of outcomes that we believe that, just following on from what Ian was saying about the savings that can be made, even although you're driving down speed and you know, having an effect on. Sorry, my machine's taken over here itself. So just to go back, we're currently working with companies like Ford, with General Motors, to take the technology. Sorry, does that keep on doing it at your end as well? Can somebody just tell me if this is taken over? It keeps on jumping and I don't know what's happening.
It's looking...
Caroline, can you just...
Yeah, it's looking okay at the moment, my end, Jim, but if you... oh, it's just jumped back to the logos.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll try to. I don't know what's happening, but there's some weird technology here. But anyway, don't worry. I'll try to keep the flow going. So we're working with people like Ford and with General Motors who are now putting this kind of technology actually into the vehicles, so that when they're coming off the production line, we'll be able to access the data that's coming from the vehicles and help improve the analytical information that companies will be able to use to drive better outcomes around safety. But just before we get into that, to look at the future, I mean, there's a sort of a new generation coming, and we call them the selfie generation. And the only tool that we can see that these people actually ever use is the selfie stick. And I'm sorry for the images there, but you can see that I'm not very good at it. So I'm clearly not I'm not very up with all this selfie generation, but this generation are going to come and get us soon. They're more connected than ever we've been in the past, and they're more demanding of systems and technologies. They're looking at themselves being able to use autonomous vehicles in the future. They're looking at Uber as their method of driving from job to job, and they have a need for it's a now culture. So they're looking for immediate gratification and immediacy on everything. And this gives us some challenges going forward, because as soon as we start to put employees in things like autonomous vehicles and Uber, we start to lose some of the controls that we have around speeding and how we help our drivers change their attitude to speeding. So these are really future thoughts that we have to start looking at the moment. And from an article which was on the TV the other evening, it's saying now that children age 10 today may never hold a driving license, and that therefore gives us some challenges for the future if we're starting to use third-party people to drive our staff around the country for whatever reason. And we need to be ahead of that curve, and many of the customers we're talking to are looking at this future kind of technologies and how do they put something in place to manage the speeding of the person who's actually driving the vehicle where there isn't a direct correlation with each other. So what we're seeing across many customers is that where we used to have just the fleet manager, it is now becoming a whole of business requirement, and to get some outcome, safety being one of the most critical parts. But as was said by Ian, what we're also looking at trying to make sure we have is that we can increase our efficiencies and we can continue to develop our productive outcomes even while safety is core to everything we do. And therefore we need to start looking at all our connected intelligence and all the assets, etc., that we have to move around and use on a daily basis so that we can ensure that safety is driven by all of these different connected devices. Many of our customers are seeing huge reductions in speeding, and this has been one of our major driving points for this last few years. By reducing speeding, we can save money, we can improve safety, and some customers are experiencing up to 69% savings and reducing of accidents and crashes. Here was a very dramatic reduction. A company called Asplund who looked at their problem across then some 10,000 vehicles. Now they have 44,000 vehicles worldwide, many of them in New Zealand, and they looked at how could they drastically reduce their speeding, and by putting in certain programs back in 2010, they have being able to manage and reduce the crashes, etc., and get a return on that investment over this last few years. And more recently, they've taken this to a new level. One of our existing customers, a company called Rain for Rent, have just completed a program using the latest technologies, which I'll just let this run. Caroline, can you hear this?
We can't hear it completely, Jim, just because I think it's coming through your computer, but it should be on the recording of the webinar.
Okay, hold on.
Driver safety scorecard has been our primary tool. Metrics we're looking at are speeding over limits, top speed, hard acceleration, hard braking, and seatbelt usage. The scorecard will essentially give us event counts anytime one of those adverse events is triggered, and then based on mileage, it'll give you an actual score. One of the things we wanted to do was take that scorecard performance to the next level and create a contest, a game. We called it the Battle of the Branches. Each month we would take the scorecard performance for each branch. They were head-to-head by location, and highest score moves on. It's a really healthy competition going on here with all the branches. There's a competition among the drivers now. Everybody wants to be at 100% every month, which is great. So that's our goal. Probably the most exciting part that we've seen is that it's translated to a 60% reduction in our preventable accident frequency.
So that shows a 60% reduction in preventable accidents. By any manner, that's a significant saving. And they did this by looking at the kind of trends that they were seeing. They were looking at speeding, At the high end, they were looking at harsh braking and harsh acceleration, but more importantly, they were looking at the posted speed limits. And this is a true example I'm showing here. And as you can see, you know, anybody who has posted speed limits in excess of 60,000 times has a problem that they should be trying to resolve. And to be able to drive that change, it's important that it's driven down through management, but particularly there has to be programs in place which will ensure that the management at supervisory level are affecting the change down into the drivers. And we've put together some other products which we won an award last year for through Brake, a product called Coach, and I'll come to that in a second, because that really was an outcome from the selfie generation who we brought in and asked them how we could motivate them if and when they did get a driving license to participate in these safety programs. But you know, when we look across the industry, some customers have real major issues around posted speed limits. And as was said earlier, whilst the speeding is a major driver, it's important that our supervisors have tools, our drivers have coaching products, because at the end of it, that's going to drive some significant changes through our things like productivity gains from start of day and end of day, because the one thing that we do want to make sure is that everyone gets home at the end of the day, and all our systems are driven towards that outcome. But the supervisor and the coach products are really where we're seeing the biggest benefits coming. We see here the companies are now beginning to look at the analytics and have a culture of safety. It's obvious when you run a report and you can see that one particular person, who's obviously blocked out here, has significantly more speeding offences over 120 kilometres. I do understand this is an Australian company and that it is slightly different over in New Zealand, but nevertheless what this starts to do is highlight some of the outcomes that we're seeing around speeding, where we can start to highlight those people immediately within the company and put driver safety programs in place for them. Here was an example of somebody in the Northern Territory. If some of you have you know, employees who work in that environment, then again, we don't say that you can't have 130 kilometers an hour, but best practice would say that you shouldn't be going above 115 in these environments. So the tools are there to manage that outcome, but by any means, somebody who's doing those kind of high-level speeds is just unacceptable now in today's society, and this is really where crashes start to take place. So the products and the tools that we're giving is that supervisor, we've identified that when a supervisor either is driving along with the driver on a day-to-day basis or has communication with them immediately, that he starts to see offences taking place, then that immediacy allows a control mechanism which will push the driver to change his behavior. And to help him do that, we've put together the award-winning Coach application. This is will run on iOS and Android, and this is our interaction with the driver. So immediately the driver can be part of a team and a leaderboard, and he can start to see his ranking against his peers and his colleagues. And if he's number 1, he's going to be a happy person, but if he's number 20 out of number 20, then you can guarantee that he will change his driver behavior the next day. And the whole intent here is really about changing and managing the driver behavior, rather than have a supervising discussion which says you were going too fast, and the person saying, no, it wasn't, government wasn't me, it was somebody else driving my vehicle. This is really about at the heart of the driver and changing the driver behavior. And again, all of this analytics is available through to the driver when they start jobs, when they finish jobs. That allows us to calculate the speeds that they've been going on average, so therefore we can start to see if they're working more efficiently, or just racking up costs by going too fast. So here's an example of a company actually who have just over 5,000 vehicles, where we did the complete analysis of their entire population of vehicles over a period of time. We looked at the return on investment. We looked at what could be saved in terms of harsh braking and harsh acceleration by taking that initial part away from the speeding element of it, because if somebody's harsh braking and harsh accelerating, then there's a fair probability that they'll be speeding as well. And here you can start to see some of the cost savings that can be made around, admittedly 5,000 vehicles, but you know, divide them by whatever number of vehicles you have, and you start to see the kind of savings that can be made. So here at 10% saving, there was $1.3 million. So just by managing speed, we start to save money. Equally, we'll look at crashes. There was 60 incidents in the year, an average of 4,500 per incident. So therefore, it doesn't take a long time to start racking up major costs again. And on top of that, infringement management is always difficult, is always a problem to confirm whether something was or has happened, or what the circumstance was. So again, by having tools, you'll be able to manage and monitor, and hopefully we'll be able to reduce the time involved in managing the whole process of infringement management. And then, as Ian said, just in terms of maintenance, discs, brakes, etc., there's a significant wear and tear that can be reduced by reducing speed and harsh braking and harsh acceleration. So Telligis brings all this together and gives you the business intelligence that allows you to manage and monitor and change driver behavior rather than being in a confrontational discussion with a driver. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much for that, Jim. Again, that was a really interesting presentation. Thank you. I've got one question through already. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to send those through, and we'll just making myself the presenter again as well. So the question that I've got already for you, Jim, is from Adam, who asks, how does your system monitor posted speed limit breaches, given that online maps can be notoriously inaccurate or out of date in certain areas? How do you manage that?
Well, and we are reliant on many occasions on the mapping companies and the NZTA in keeping that data up to speed. So it is always going to be a problem, but we have an edit function so that when we do establish that a road needs to change, then we can do it on the fly as opposed to having to wait to the next release of the product. But it is a challenge. It is a challenge for everyone.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much for that. If anyone will just give it a second in case anyone is currently typing a question through this one. Okay, that looks like that's it for now. But again, if you have a question later on for Jim, then we can put it to him at the end of the webinar as well. So thanks very much again for that, Jim. We'll move on to our next speaker for today, which is Jeff Howells, who is the CEO of Fleet Coach and eDrive. So I'm just going to unmute you. Jeff, can you hear me?
Yes, hi Caroline.
Great. Hi Jeff, we can hear you as well, so that's brilliant. So I'm going to, as with the other speakers, make you the presenter now. And hopefully a box will pop up on your screen. Great. Yep, we've got that now.
Excellent.
So, yep, we can see your screen. Thanks very much.
Great stuff. Thanks, Caroline. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to Break for allowing us to share some insights with you this afternoon. I'm Jeff from Fleet Coach, and today I'm going to talk about driver training. And I seem to be having similar problems as the previous presenter with moving a slide on. Great. Sorry about that, guys. Why do we speed? I want you to think about the last time your speedo sort of crept over the speed limit, and why do you think it happened? Were you late, or you're not paying attention, or did the speed limit feel too slow for the road? Well, looking at these statistics, we all know speeding is bad. It's not great for the car, the environment, or your safety. Everyone knows that if you're caught speeding, it can cost a fair amount of money. And everyone hears about the thousands of crashes every year, which only happen or were worsened because the driver was going too fast. But we still do it. At the end of the day, it's individual choice whether to speed or not. Everyone knows the consequences, be it a speeding ticket, losing your license, losing your job, or worse still, causing a serious crash. But it's really a driver's choice to speed or not. So research has indicated that drivers who enjoy their lifestyle drive slower and safer. And this obviously makes sense, because why would you put your life at risk if you're happy? So speeding is often seen as a way of expressing a psychological issue. Perhaps it's a response to being bored, unfulfilled, angry, or generally unhappy. So driver training for speed needs to be about helping drivers make better choices. So we all know what we should and shouldn't be doing, but sometimes our behavior doesn't match up. We might be trying to lose weight, for example, as I know I constantly am, and we know we shouldn't eat that donut, but we do it anyway. Speed choices just like this. Also, driving fast may not trigger our fear response as much as it should, because we're seemingly safe and sound in air-conditioned comfort. Or maybe we can only see the short-term gain of passing that slow driver, not the long-term benefit of staying safe. We might be trying to impress others, or maybe it's simply a case of foot getting heavier, and before we know it, we're speeding. So driver training needs to engage and motivate drivers to create long-lasting change and good habits. If we can get drivers to recognize the reasons they speed, we can help them address these behaviors. Research has shown that better hazard perception skills lead to better and slower speed choices. It makes sense. The more hazards or potential hazards you see, the slower you should be going. Online driver training can accurately measure and improve hazard perception skills. In-vehicle driver training is more about manual car handling skills, and done in isolation, this can actually have a negative outcome of making the driver overconfident. When people think they're better than they are, it actually makes them riskier drivers. However, this doesn't mean in-car driver training should be avoided, as there are specialist skills that are best taught in-car, such as 4x4, and we do have a number of South Island clients who supplement online training with in-car training focusing on 4x4 and winter conditions. So the legal speed limit is always intended for when the conditions are good. Drivers need to make a choice as to whether or not they should be driving slower. So what speed do you think would be best to use here? Were you thinking around 70 to 80 kilometers an hour? Although we're on a long straight, the road is fairly unforgiving with no shoulder, and there are roadside signs and power poles positioned close to the road's edge. Did you also notice the ditches on both sides and the crest in the road ahead, which will affect your visibility? So what about this one? What speed would you choose? Did you say it's safe to drive up to the speed limit of 100k here? It's a clear sunny day with no sunstrike. We're on a wide multi-lane road with both median and roadside barriers, and traffic is light. Telematics and speeding tickets can't really tell you about speed choices when the conditions are adverse or different, whether it be poor weather or roadworks. Knowing why others on the road do what they do can affect speed choice and frustration levels as well. Have you ever wondered why the moron up ahead drives painfully slow until he gets to a passing lane, where he speeds up so much you have trouble passing, but then slows right down again when the passing lane ends? Well, the chances are you might do the same. It's because the road seems safer when it's wider and smoother, therefore safer to speed up. So how can your organisation help? Well, driver training can go so far, but it's also important that your company has a good culture around speed choice. Some companies may give out the message that speeding is bad, but let's say your company has no disciplines around speed tickets. What message is that sending? If the work environment or culture allows employees to think driving faster means they've got more time to make sales, then they're logically going to speed more. We have organisations that embrace change and really tackle the issues of speed. One actually flying down a HR person to speak to someone who'd gotten a speeding ticket from Auckland to Wellington purely to have a word with them. That's a much better message they're sending. Companies like Coca-Cola, Amatil run a program in association with Break around Speed Week to boost awareness and ensure staff are embracing the safer driver policy, making your staff fully aware of their responsibilities. Telematics and driver training complement and further endorse a better and safer culture. Driver training is important when dealing with speed. It's not about increasing manual skills in a car, it's about changing behaviour. And it's about increasing the crucial higher level skills like hazard perception. We can effectively train both of these on a computer, and you can help by creating a good company culture around speed. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Jeff. I'm just going to make myself the presenter again, and if anyone's got a question for Jeff on the driver training side of things, then please send that through. Well. And while we're just waiting to see if any questions come through for you, Jeff, just a quick reminder, we'll also do a quick wrap up of questions at the end. I know another question came through from Philip for Jim, so we'll put that to you at the end of the webinar. And now I've got a question for you, Jeff. How do you envisage, this is from Darren, sorry, how do you envisage your product changing as autonomous vehicles start to become more popular?
Yeah, obviously we hear a lot about autonomous vehicles and the future. The data that we collect is going to be critical in that, in helping that move towards autonomous vehicles. So yeah, part of the future is we've got billions and billions of hours of people driving, but not a great deal of data of vehicles driving on their own. So we still see in the near to mid-term future, we've got a major problem with driving behaviours of the people who are currently driving. So we're all about responding to the here and now, and then we will move towards how we collect that data from autonomous vehicles and to be able to use it in a meaningful manner.
That's great, thanks for that. I've got one from Philip here for you too. So he says, with so much focus on the culture of NZ drivers particularly, but this might be the case in Australia and elsewhere as well, what have you found to be the single most effective tool in helping staff change from the I don't care if I'm speeding to the we all need to be aware of everything we do on the road?
Yeah, so the whole approach that we take is a coaching approach. We take the driver on a journey of self-discovery. They discover what habits that they've picked up and where they're falling down. We can put them through risky situations without actually putting them at risk, and make them aware of their lack of skills in hazard perception. And bearing in mind, hazard perception is one of the major causes of crashes along with speed. So it's actually changing their culture and behaviour for them to understand what they've been doing wrong, but more importantly, measuring how they've improved, and then to drive down those all cost-related metrics like accident-related costs and fuel, and also working with your telematics providers to take that data that will indicate where further training is needed. But it's that cultural change, and it's not just brought about by training. It's the company, and you know, if you've got telematics, it's a fantastic tool to aid and point towards where the training is needed.
Great, thanks for that, Jeff. So that's it for questions currently. So any other questions to speakers, please send them through and we'll put them to the speaker shortly. I'm just going to mute you again temporarily, Jeff, and I'm just going to go over a couple of extra things that we haven't already covered today before we do that final Q&A and wrap up. So around a third of workplaces, workplace deaths in industrialised countries are caused by road crashes. So it's essential that employers look at their road risk, and getting support for improving fleet safety at a senior level can be challenging, but it's crucial to make sure you have buy-in from the top. But there are three key things that you can highlight if you need to build a business case for fleet safety within your organisation, and those three things that we are saving money, legal compliance, and also social and moral responsibility. So investing in fleet safety can save you much more in the long run. After a collision, the costs to an organisation include things like increased insurance premiums, vehicle downtime, lost productivity, employee sick leave, missed sales, and damage to reputation. And driving at excessive speeds, as we said earlier, also increases your fuel consumption and vehicle wear and tear. In terms of legal compliance, you need to ensure your company is complying with your country's health and safety laws in relation to at-work drivers, whatever they might be. And organisations also have a moral and a social responsibility towards their employees, and also to the wider communities in which you're operating. Once you've actually gained management support, it's really important to maintain and utilise it as well, so ensuring that all employees, including your senior staff, are following the same fleet safety policies and procedures that you've got in place, because this will help you to maintain and build a strong fleet safety culture, as Jeff was just saying, across your whole organisation, and not just feel that it's isolated to your staff that drive for work. Another key area to look at is reporting and recording all of your incidents, whether they're major or minor, and also your near misses, because this helps you to make informed decisions about the most effective and efficient ways to manage risk. If you've got collision reporting policy and forms to go with it, interviewing drivers following incidents, those things will help you to target any interventions and risk management measures correctly. And it's also really useful to benchmark against other companies or anonymous data. You can go to the web address on this slide for a free benchmarking tool where you put in your data and you can compare it anonymously to other companies who've also put in their own data to benchmark from around the world. It's estimated that up to 95% of crashes are down to driver error. So it's vital that employees who drive understand the importance of safety and simple steps that they're expected to take to protect themselves and others. So safety messages can be included in communications, handbooks, assessments and codes of conduct. as well as induction and training and using things like telematics or driver monitoring, as we've already discussed. And as we said, driver speed for a variety of reasons, as Ian and Jeff mentioned, and identifying these reasons is a really powerful way of deciding what further management on educational training might be appropriate and targeting that. So if a driver's got a gap in their skills, they might not be in full control of their vehicle or might not be aware that they're going over the speed limit, and in that case, improving their skills, further training would be necessary for those circumstances. For other drivers, there might be an issue with their attitude or knowledge about speed and the dangers. And you can also have things like peer pressure, ignorance of the speed limits, and an overestimation of their ability to drive fast safely. There are also work-related factors that might lead employees to drive at unsafe speeds. So these include time pressure to get to meetings and scheduled deliveries, peer pressure, payment by results, work-related stress, and those sorts of things. So if you're employing people who drive for work, then having a robust speed policy in place as part of your wider fleet safety framework is a great thing to have, and it should include things like not exceeding the speed limit and always driving to road conditions. But also as managers, you can ensure that your work practices don't encourage or incentivize excessive and inappropriate speeds. So journey scheduling, allowing sufficient time for drivers to take account of reasonably foreseeable weather and traffic conditions and to drive well within speed limits, work targets and practices, reviewing them to ensure that they don't inadvertently pressurize staff to travel at unsafe speeds. Those are really important things. And also when dealing with clients, you can avoid making concessions that might affect road safety, like committing to delivery deadlines that are unrealistic in terms of time constraints for drivers, or organising meetings without allowing the driver sufficient time to travel safely. We also talked earlier about myths around speed, and when assessing drivers regarding their attitudes to speed, it's important to spot and address common misconceptions, such as believing it's acceptable to go faster at night because there's less traffic about, and things like good drivers can drive faster because they have better reactions. Drivers are your staff, and they're more likely to listen to you. If you have a fleet safety policy in place and are actively tackling road risks through a variety of measures that are monitored, evaluated and improved upon, you will build a road safety culture within your organisation, and you can gain driver buy-in by showing it's not about Big Brother or punishing bad drivers. So you have to have some interventions for risky drivers, but that you're rewarding safe drivers, as Jim was talking about earlier. With one of his examples, there's lots of companies who do this with things like driver leaderboards, competitions, driver of the year, and most importantly, it's about getting them home safely to their families every day. Organisations that build a culture of road safety, you also tend to find that it goes beyond drivers and goes through to all of their staff, who also then take those messages home to their families, friends, and the wider community. So employers can take helpful steps to raise awareness within their communities about the need to slow down and make communities safer, happier places. For example, getting involved in community projects, Road Safety Week, activities like that can help to reinforce your internal awareness raising work and reinforce a safe driving culture within your organisation too. So moving on to our final Q&A, I'm just going to make sure that we can hear both Jeff and Jim. Unfortunately, Ian has had to leave, so anything for him, we will put to him afterwards and he'll find out the relevant information and get back to us, and I will pass that on. But I do have a couple of other questions through. So there was one, Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Great. So I've got one for you here from Philip asking, are there any other direct cost savings, such as a saving in the administration of registration and licensing for fleet operators?
Relating to speed? Not quite
speed
sure
and relating to your so relating to using things like telematics systems? Are there any other direct cost savings, such as a saving in the administration of things like registrations and driver licensing?
Well, it gives a greater control over the monitoring of driver licensing for particular types of vehicles. So it will allow if a driver, is not allowed to drive a particular vehicle, there are systems which will allow you to, as a driver comes into the vehicle, tag in, and it will automatically evaluate and decide whether that driver is capable of driving that. I don't mean from a physical perspective, but from a licensing perspective. And if it doesn't, it will send an alert to someone to say that someone is trying to drive a vehicle without the relevant documentation in place. So the technology is there to ensure that the driver is capable from a license perspective to drive that vehicle. There's other technologies now becoming more available around things like Apple iWatches and so on to determine whether the driver is physically fit to drive the vehicle as well. In other words, they've had enough sleep, etc. And those new technologies are beginning to become available as we see the whole telematics business changing.
Great, thanks for that, Jim. And I've got another question for you as well from Darren here. Given that in New Zealand we have a high proportion of migrant drivers, many of which never had to take a New Zealand licence because they can simply transfer their overseas one for a New Zealand one, do you have any stats about whether more incidents or crashes are caused by recent migrants to New Zealand who are working in New Zealand?
No, I don't have those kind of statistics. We can only get our statistics from our customers, and they wouldn't be determining whether this would be a recently migrated worker. Thanks
for that. And that one's for Darren. I do know that currently, I believe it's around 6% of crashes in New Zealand are involve an overseas license holder, but as you say, you're talking about people who can transfer over to a New Zealand license and specifically working in New Zealand, and as far as I'm aware, currently there isn't any data on that we've come across, certainly, but if there is, I will pass it on to you. Any further questions? I think that's all we've had through in terms of questions. So thanks again, Jeff and Jim. I'll just wrap up the webinar now with a couple of final things. So thanks everyone for sending in your questions to speakers as well. If there's anything that you think of after the webinar that you want to ask, you can always drop us an email at break and we'll do our best to pass on that information to the speakers. We're a charity, so we can't deliver our services, including events like this, without support from corporate partners like Telogis, who sponsored today's webinar, and from fundraising and donations. There's lots of ways that you can get involved with BRAKE and help us to prevent road deaths and injuries and help families to recover from the shock and trauma of a loved one dying in a road crash. And your support enables us to provide free support books to people bereaved in road crashes. It helps us to provide free road safety resources to schools and communities, and many other things. So we really appreciate the support of people like you. You can support us by joining BRAKE Professional and getting access to all of those things I mentioned at the start of the webinar around the resources that we have available, our fortnightly bulletins and other events like this. If you're not already a member, we are offering webinar attendees a discount on the normal rate, so it would just be either 60 or 172 New Zealand dollars, depending on the size of your organisation. If it's something you might be interested in, just tick the box on the feedback survey or contact me and I'll get in contact to discuss further with you. If you're not sure if you're a member, members have password access to brakepro.org and receive our Target Zero news bulletin fortnightly. If you're still not sure if you're a member, just tick the box anyway and I'll contact you to let you know on that one. You can also become a corporate partner, helping us to deliver our services. You could organise a fundraiser at your workplace. And you can find out more about membership, partnership and fundraising by contacting me or ticking the relevant box on the feedback form. You could make a personal donation today at break.org.nz/donate, and just $20 is enough to provide a free children's support book to a bereaved family. So small amounts all help us to deliver our support services for free. We also send out fortnightly bulletins with details of events and resources. Many of you signed up for this on your registration form for this event, but if you're not sure whether you did and you want to, just get in contact and we can sign you up to that. You could also make the pledge, which is our 6 golden rules of safe driving. It includes speed, slowing down in communities outside schools, slowing down on rural roads and driving to the conditions. So you can go to the website there to find out more and to make your own pledge. So I hope you found the webinar today useful and interesting. Please do fill in the feedback survey when you leave the webinar. It's really useful in helping us to plan our future events. And as I mentioned, we will be circulating the slides and also the webinar recording for you to access afterwards, so that you can go back and look at what's been covered today. So a big thank you again to all of our speakers today and to our sponsors, to Logis. And finally, thank you all of you for taking part. Hope you have a great rest of the day.